Mahalia, in your life, you've accomplished so many things that I imagine you never thought of. For instance, this beautiful award that was given to you not long ago.
Yes.
St. Vincent de Paul Award for serving God through the needs of men. Mahalia Jackson, 1970.
And don't let me fall. You got to learn to show kindness to those that feel that nobody cares about them.
You know her voice, you know her legacy, but do you really know what Mahalia Jackson sacrificed to become the Queen of Gospel? Behind every powerful note that moved millions to tears was a woman fighting battles most of us can't imagine. Chronic illness that slowly stole her strength, betrayals from those she trusted most, and a lonely journey through fame that would break most people. What you're about to discover isn't just another celebrity story. This is the raw, unfiltered truth about how the greatest gospel singer who ever lived went from sleeping in a leaky house by the Mississippi levees to standing before 250,000 people at the March on Washington, only to die alone in a hospital bed at just 60 years old. The question everyone should be asking is this: how did a woman with such an extraordinary gift end up paying the ultimate price for her devotion to God and her people? Stay with me, because what happened in her final years will change everything you thought you knew about success, sacrifice, and the true cost of being a legend. Mahalia Jackson wasn't born into privilege or comfort. She came into this world in New Orleans as the 13th person crammed into a tiny, leaking shack where rain poured through the roof, and you could see sunlight through the walls. Her mother, Charity Clark, wasn't married to her father, Johnny Jackson, which was common for black women in that era, but still carried a heavy social burden. Both sets of her grandparents had been enslaved her paternal grandparents on a rice plantation, her maternal grandparents picking cotton under the brutal Louisiana sun. This wasn't ancient history for Mahalia. This was her family's living memory, the foundation of everything she would become. When she was born, her little legs were bowed and her eyes infected. Kids cruelly nicknamed her fish hooks because of how she walked, and while her eyes healed quickly, those legs required constant attention and reminded her daily that she was different, that life wasn't going to be easy. Then came the blow that would shape her entire childhood. At just 5 years old, Mahalia's mother died from illness, leaving her orphaned and terrified. Her Aunt Duke, the woman called Mahaila, after whom Mahalia was named, took her in along with her half-brother Peter. But Aunt Duke wasn't a warm, nurturing caregiver. She was strict, temperamental, and demanded constant work from little Mahalia. Days were spent scrubbing floors, doing chores, and trying to stay out of trouble. The only escape, the only place where Mahalia felt truly safe and seen, was Mount Moriah Baptist Church, where her grandfather preached. That's where she discovered something powerful. Music wasn't just entertainment, it was survival. It was a way to transcend the poverty, the pain, the endless cycle of struggle. By 12, she joined the junior choir, and even then, people noticed something different about her voice. It wasn't polished or trained, but it carried something deeper, something that seemed to come from a place of profound truth. By 14, her legs finally began to straighten, but her relationship with Aunt Duke had deteriorated to the breaking point. The arguments became so explosive that Mahalia would get thrown out of the house, forced to bounce between relatives' homes, sleeping wherever she could find space. After one particularly brutal fight, she moved out for a month. But she was just a teenager, completely unprepared to care for herself, and the loneliness crushed her. Her family, worried she'd end up destitute or worse, convinced her to move to Chicago with her Aunt Hannah. Mahalia thought this was her chance for a fresh start, maybe to become a nurse or a teacher, respectable professions that could give her stability. But life had entirely different plans, and those plans would be far more extraordinary and painful than she could have imagined. Chicago didn't offer the easy path she'd hoped for. Instead of going to school, Mahalia found herself caring for her sick Aunt Hannah while working brutal hours as a laundress and in factories just to survive. Her hands were raw, her body exhausted. But at night, she sang. She called herself a fish and bread singer, meaning she sang both for her faith and literally to keep food on the table. That's when destiny intervened in the form of Thomas A. Dorsey, a former blues musician who was transitioning into gospel. Dorsey saw something in Mahalia that no one else had fully recognized yet. He trained her intensely for 2 months, teaching her to slow down, to let the emotion breathe between the words, to make every note feel like a prayer. His real motive was practical. He needed someone to help sell his sheet music on Chicago street corners for 10 cents a page. They didn't make much money standing there in the cold, hawking gospel songs to passers-by. But something miraculous was happening. Together, completely unintentionally, they were creating an entirely new sound that would revolutionize American music forever. Gospel blues. For years, Dorsey and Mahalia toured relentlessly across the country. He played piano while she sang, and together they moved audiences to spiritual ecstasy. Dorsey would hand her lyrics, and Mahalia would improvise melodies on the spot, creating music that had never existed before that very moment. Her goal was always to wreck a church, to shake people so deeply that they felt the Holy Spirit moving through them. And she succeeded, night after night, in city after city. She recorded her first songs hoping to sell them at church conventions, but the money was negligible. Still, she wasn't discouraged. She kept performing every Sunday, at funerals, at political rallies, slowly building an audience. Then she made a promise that would define her entire career. When her grandfather had a stroke, Mahalia prayed desperately for his recovery and vowed to God that if he survived, she would never set foot in a theater again. He lived, and Mahalia kept that sacred promise for the rest of her life, turning down countless opportunities that would have made her far wealthier if they involved theatrical performances. As the Great Depression eased, Mahalia hustled harder than ever. She earned a beautician's license from Madam C.J. Walker's beauty school and opened her own salon in Bronzeville, Chicago's black neighborhood. But this wasn't just a business. It became a community gathering place where gospel singers would congregate, where she'd cook food on a little stove in the back, and people would talk, sing, and dream together. Her big break came when she performed at the Golden Gate Ballroom in Harlem and caught the attention of Art Freeman, a scout for Apollo Records. They signed her, but her first 2 releases flopped completely. The label's boss, Bess Berman, pushed Mahalia to record blues, insisting that's where the money was. Mahalia refused point blank. Freeman convinced Berman to give her one final chance, and Mahalia chose a song she'd been using as a warm-up in concerts, called Move On Up a Little Higher. That decision changed everything. The song exploded in 1947, selling 50,000 copies in Chicago alone, and 2 million nationwide, unheard-of numbers for a gospel record. Suddenly, Mahalia Jackson wasn't just a singer, she was a phenomenon. Fame brought incredible opportunities, but also devastating betrayals. She sang at President Harry Truman's 1948 campaign, received White House invitations, and gained a following in Europe after a French jazz enthusiast played her music on the radio. But then, she discovered her manager Berman had been stealing from her, pocketing money that rightfully belonged to Mahalia and letting her Apollo contract expire. Just when things looked darkest, producer Mitch Miller offered her a 4-year contract with Columbia Records, worth $50,000 annually, equivalent to about $570,000 in today's money. This made her the first gospel singer ever signed to Columbia, one of the world's largest labels. But Miller wanted her to sing ballads and classical music to appeal to white audiences. Once again, Mahalia refused to compromise. Her first Columbia song, Rusty Old Halo, became a massive hit, and suddenly she was being called the greatest spiritual singer alive. Columbia gave her a radio show in Chicago, but it was quickly canceled because television networks feared losing Southern advertisers who didn't want to see a black woman in the spotlight. This confusion and hurt never left Mahalia. How could people who called themselves Christians object to her singing hymns? But she pressed forward, signing with the William Morris Agency for major concerts and television appearances. Yet being a black performer during segregation meant constant degradation. She and her team couldn't find safe places to eat or sleep in the South. They faced Jim Crow laws at every turn, sometimes forced to sleep in her car. She had to carry enormous amounts of cash because many places wouldn't cash checks for black people. Despite these humiliations, Mahalia used her platform brilliantly. She'd ask audiences at her concerts to mix races, reminding them they were all Christians before God. When she moved into a white Chicago neighborhood in the late 50s, her house was immediately attacked, and she received credible death threats. Mayor Richard Daley stationed police outside her home for an entire year. Through it all, she never stopped performing, never stopped preaching unity. But there's something most people don't know about Mahalia's personal life, and it reveals just how complex her journey really was. Before fame found her, she married Isaac Ike Hockenhull, a chemist working as a postman during the Depression. She was drawn to his kindness and intelligence. His mother had created 200 formulas for homemade beauty products, recipes she'd sold door to door, and she gave these to the young couple. They started making cosmetics in their kitchen, and Mahalia would haul these products on her tours, trying desperately to sell them. The business failed miserably. Then Hockenhull lost his job, and they found themselves with less than $1 between them. When auditions opened for The Swing Mikado, a jazz musical paying $60 weekly, about $1,300, in today's money, Hockenhull pushed Mahalia hard to audition. Here's what's heartbreaking. He didn't respect her gospel music. He thought it was beneath her, that she needed formal training to become a real artist. They fought constantly about it. Mahalia, desperate not to disappoint her husband, auditioned even though it made her miserable. When she got offered the role, she shocked everyone by turning it down. Hockenhull couldn't understand, but she knew in her soul that this wasn't her path. His gambling problem and financial mismanagement destroyed what was left of their marriage, and they eventually divorced. Through friends, Mahalia met Sigmund Galloway, a former musician working in construction. Despite her hectic schedule and the constant company of musicians and friends, she felt profoundly lonely. She started courting Galloway, and in a move that surprised everyone close to her, married him in her living room just weeks later. But the universe was about to deliver a crushing blow. While driving home from a street Louis concert, Mahalia couldn't stop coughing. She checked into a Chicago hospital, and the public diagnosis was heart strain and exhaustion. Privately, her doctors told her the terrifying truth. She'd had a heart attack and sarcoidosis, a disease causing inflammatory cells to form in organs, had invaded her heart. Her recovery took an entire year. She lost 50 pounds, couldn't tour or record, and from that point forward lived with constant fatigue, episodes of rapid heartbeat, and dangerously high blood pressure. As her condition worsened, Mahalia often sank into depression, frustrated by her body's betrayal. And Galloway proved to be utterly unreliable. He'd disappear for long stretches during her illness, then return and insist she was imagining her symptoms. He tried taking over her career management, despite having no expertise. They fought viciously about money. Twice, he attempted to strike her. The second time, she ducked, and he broke his hand on furniture. When she finally filed for divorce, he demanded a jury trial to embarrass her by publicizing their private struggles. When his infidelities were proven in court, the judge awarded him nothing. Mahalia was free, but damaged. Through all this personal turmoil, Mahalia never lost sight of what truly mattered. She believed money just drew flies, and remained keenly aware that success meant responsibility. She came from the segregated South. She knew exactly what her people were enduring. So she lent her voice to the civil rights movement, singing in honor of Rosa Parks, raising bail money for jailed activists, and working intimately with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Many gospel singers and church leaders opposed political involvement, But King's Southern Christian Leadership Conference was church-based, so Mahalia could participate without compromising her faith. Gospel became the soundtrack of the movement. Activists sang it while marching, while being jailed, while being brutalized. Mahalia's greatest contribution came at the 1963 March on Washington. Before 250,000 people at the Lincoln Memorial, she sang, "I've been buked and scorned," evoking the suffering activists were fighting to end, then shifted to "How I Got Over," manifesting the movement's hope and defiance. King was the final speaker that day, and as a performer, Mahalia could tell his carefully prepared speech wasn't landing. From the side of the stage, she called out to him, "Tell them about the dream, Martin." At her urging, King abandoned his script and delivered the most famous speech in American history. If you listen back, you can hear how his intonation became like singing. King was following Mahalia's lead, using the very techniques she'd pioneered. But perhaps her greatest heartbreak came in 1968, when she learned of King's assassination. Mahalia never truly recovered from losing her dear friend. People who worked with her said she'd sit in dressing rooms talking about him. "Boy, preacher, I miss Martin. I wish he was around to see all this." It wasn't political for her. It was deeply personal. Mostly in secret, Mahalia had been paying for young people's education, funding their dreams of learning gospel music, a vision she'd cherished for over a decade. Stories of her generosity spread, yet her phone number remained listed in the Chicago Public Directory. She received non-stop calls from friends, family, strangers, asking for money, advice on breaking into music, guidance on life decisions. Her house had constant traffic. Visitors she welcomed warmly. She'd cook for them. She'd loved cooking since childhood, and some would stay for days or weeks at her invitation. She designed a chain of chicken restaurants specifically to be Black-owned and operated, believing Black wealth should be reinvested in Black communities. In 1969, she organized a salute to Black women, donating all proceeds to her foundation for college scholarships for Black youth. In 1971, Mahalia embarked on a European tour, determined to share her gift despite declining health. But she had to cut it short. Her eyes became painfully inflamed, and severe cramps seized her legs and hands. Still, she returned to Europe in 1969, where fans welcomed her rapturously. She toured the Caribbean, even traveled to Liberia in West Africa, continuing to inspire despite her body breaking down. During another European tour, she became critically ill in Germany and had to rush back to Chicago. In January 1972, she was hospitalized for surgery to remove a bowel obstruction. She never woke up. Her death during recovery shocked the world. Even though fans knew she'd been struggling, her funeral reflected her immense impact. Despite brutal cold and snow, 50,000 people came to Greater Salem Baptist Church in Chicago to pay respects. The next day, 6,000 gathered at the Airy Crown Theater, including Mayor Daley, celebrities, and politicians. Her body was returned to New Orleans, where she was born. 60,000 people viewed her casket at the Rivergate Auditorium, guarded by military and police. As her funeral procession passed Mount Moriah Baptist Church, that sacred place where a poor little girl with bowed legs first discovered her voice, her gospel music played over loudspeakers one final time. Singer Harry Belafonte said at her death that she was the most powerful Black woman in the United States, and there wasn't a single field hand, factory worker, or intellectual who didn't respond to her voice. Mahalia Jackson sacrificed her health, her privacy, her personal happiness, and ultimately her life to give the world something transcendent. Her voice is gone, but what she stood for, dignity, faith, justice, and the redemptive power of music, will echo forever.